You're listening to Becoming CEO, where we share our journeys as solo founders to becoming the CEO of seven-figure businesses.
And these are our behind-the-scenes conversations as we figure it out. And these are things that most people just aren't sharing.
I'm waiting for you. You look like you're locked and loaded with the question. You got that smile on your face, like she's ready to fire.
I wasn't sure who was going to try to go first. So we're talking about quarterly planning today. Was just meeting with the team, kind of covering like, hey, what are our goals for Q2? Because at the time of recording this, we're getting ready to roll into Q2, and I think we suck at this process. We've adopted other people's. We've tried different ways. We've melded them into our own, and every time we do it, I feel like something's still off. So we've had a conversation previously offline about like OKRs and objectives and key results, and it seemed like you kind of had a process you felt pretty good about. So I just wanted to talk about maybe helping people think about how to plan what projects they should be tackling in a quarter and how many of them, how to measure the success. What are you looking at? Is it too much, too small?
Yeah. So I would say starting point here, just for context, we can both share this about our respective teams because who's involved in that conversation is an important input to this process. It needs to be necessarily more complicated and robust the bigger the team is, I think. And it can be a lot simpler the smaller the team is. So myself and my COO, Carrie, we set the OKRs for the organization. We set the OKRs for departments for the most part. And then we communicate those with people that are responsible for each department and help them develop their own initiatives within those OKRs to deliver on the results. Quick definition, OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. It's a management performance philosophy popularized by the folks at Intel back in the 80s. And then
Andy Grove, right?
Andy Grove, yeah. And then later on, a book was written about it by one of those Silicon Valley VC guys, whose name is escaping me now, called Measure What Matters. Google then really took it on in the high tech era, and now it's a fairly accessible framework that a lot of organizations, big and small, use to manage their people, set goals, set priorities, and create focus. Big idea, just to really sum up that definition, is objectives and key results, those two have to fit together. An objective is a broad directive. So I believe back in the day, Intel's objective was like beat Motorola or kill Motorola or something like that, right? That was their competitor. It's a directive. It's a rallying cry. It's not measurable by definition. The key results are what help you prove that you are making good on the objective. Key results are by definition measurable, they're quantifiable, they're tangible. So you set an objective, kill Motorola, beat Motorola, whatever it is. And then your key result, I don't know what theirs was. It's documented in a few books, but let's say it was sell X units of Y product. That's the agreement. If we sell X units of Y product, we know we're beating Motorola or killing Motorola. So you set your objective, and then you pair that with some tangible key results to prove that you're making progress on that objective. And those can be measured annually, quarterly, however you see fit.
Okay, so I would say that from the process, who's involved, it's me and Lisa. So same, kind of like the COO, and we communicate. We obviously will check in with people that we don't have tons of department leads at the moment. Like we kind of wear multiple hats, but we have people that are dialed in to understand data enough to kind of help us kind of put some of this together. So we, from like a responsibility, accountability, consulted, informed, the RACI model, like we definitely work with our team members to kind of hone some of that stuff in. But yeah, it's fundamentally me and Lisa as well. We've done something similar because I read Measure What Matters. And I think I agree. I mean, obviously, by definition, I agree with everything that you said. I think we try. I think our objectives aren't broad enough. Like, I think we're trying to make our objective have a KPI within the objective statement, if you will, and then we have other supporting KPIs, which now I make sense as to why that could be a little bit confusing. Um, we've also blended ours with, I'd say, if there was anything that could be polar opposite of what Intel was doing, it's from the book Shape Up or Shaping Up from Basecamp. It's how they do project planning, and they are an organization that really doesn't care. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like fundamentally realizing some of our problems. They like don't necessarily care about objectives because that's not how they don't operate that way. Like they're like, let's solve cool problems. And they work in these 6 week sprints, 6 week cycles. And we do them as 12 weeks, but like, hey, well, we know we need to do this thing, but it can't be done in less than 6 weeks. Well, how can we make a project that is doable in 6 weeks? And so they come from what problem are we solving? What is the project that can be done in 6 weeks? And they then pitch each other as to like, hey, this is why this project should be on the table for this quarter. And they call it the betting table. And they're like, these were the 3 projects that got approved for this 6 week cycle. And they have a rule that if it doesn't get done, the project is dead. Like there's no like, oh, this project rolls into the next 6 week cycle. I'm sure they break the rule on that, but they say that they don't. We do all the time. And so I think we want to have objectives and key results. We measure data, but we've kind of been taking this project based approach, and we run into 2 common problems. One, we try to do way too much in a quarter, or we're halfway through the quarter and we've done all the projects and we're like, well, has it really done anything? It has a little bit, it hasn't in some ways. And it's like, okay, well, let's just throw more on the plate. And I don't know. We've definitely felt that like that's a little bit exhausting. And so, yeah, I'm like, how do you then? I guess my question is, and maybe you have a real life example, but like, so we'll use the Intel one, like what was it? Beat Motorola, and its number. Say the KPI. One of the KPIs was number of units. You can then go on and like if you have 90 days and you're like, hey, like we have 90 days to move this needle of X units, there could be hundreds of projects that could achieve moving the needle on that. How do you then take that to the work that we're actually going to the to-do list? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think the key is ownership, right? And again, this is so much more complicated at Intel than, boutique growth or alt
Right.
agency, right? Because
Right.
what happens at Intel is then that organizational key result cascades down into department and individual key results. So that one key
Right.
result probably underneath it, I don't know, but I would imagine there's potentially hundreds of key results underneath that go to each individual in
Right.
the company, right?
Department. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, I think that's one of the hallmarks of the OKR philosophy is it's less about projects. It's less about, like who's doing what. It's less about when this thing gets delivered. It's more about ownership and transparency. So it's about being able to say to the engineer on the team, you're responsible for this. And that trickles up into this OKR and that OKR and that OKR. And if everybody does what they're responsible for doing and they take ownership of their key results, the organization wins. It's a lot simpler for us because we have, fewer owners, right? I will say this, like our approach is simple. I don't even think I think I can confidently say we're pretty lazy about objectives. Like I'm not terribly interested at this stage, and it was different in the past, and it may be different in the future. I'm not terribly interested in like painting a picture of where we're going. I'm more interested in the tangible results. So when I look at our objectives, we've got 3 OKRs for the year: revenue, profit, working capital. That's it. And we're really clear on those. And we've modeled out like the way that we began our process, which this might be useful. The way that we began our process at the beginning of the year, or rather end of last year, is we decided how much money do you want to make, revenue, how much do we want to keep, profit, and how much cash we want in the bank. And I think, to be clear, I think a lot of the underlying impact goals and what the change we want to make in the market, I think a lot of that is really implicit. And could we do a better job of spelling it out? Yeah. But again, because it's me and Carrie, like we don't have a big leadership team to rally necessarily. So there's less of that kind of rah type stuff. And it's more just like, these are the bottom line results that we want. And we know why we want them.
Yeah. Like for me, like assuming, and I forget the book, but like if Beat Motorola was actually a good example of an objective, to something like that, to me, like if I were like, what is the Beat Motorola for us, like, or something that's that broad, just seems not useful to me at all.
I'll give you an example of one that was useful for us last year. So this is 2022. Our organizational objective was to become I don't remember the exact language, but something to the effect of to become the preeminent provider of marketing training for B2B consultants and service providers. All right. Well, how do you know you did that? Right. Again, it's unmeasurable, right? You can't prove you did that. It's a direction. Right. And we paired that with the key result, which was enroll X number of people into our program or graduate, whatever it was. So if we can graduate these many people in a given year, we're at the top of the pile. That's how we used it. And that made sense at the time, because at the time I was seeing a lot of competitors creeping up, a lot of like flash in the pan, like newbies coming in, trying to build a competing offer, trying to compete. And we knew we already had leadership in the market, but we wanted to just really cement it. Right. And
so to be clear, that objective, as if it were to be said in a sentence, you're actually leaving out what number of units or by what percentage of growth of units. That's separate. That's for the key result.
The key result
part, yeah. Right? Got it. Okay.
Objectives have no numbers.
Yeah.
They're just directives. Key results are quantifiable.
and then so when it comes to how are we going to, what are the projects and initiatives and tasks, activities that we're going to do now to move this needle? How do you then gather from, if it's not project based and it's truly just objective and a key result, what amount of work can actually be done in this window of time? And then which ones are priority? So
first of all, we have our annual OKRs, right? So for us, at least this year, might have been different last year, there were 3: revenue, profit, working capital. This is where we want to get to the end of the year. That was defined, not only defined, that was financially modeled out in terms of what level of revenue, what our expense ratios, like all that was modeled out for the year so that financially we could see the picture. Okay. And then for each quarter, we take that and we break that down into departmental OKRs, functional OKRs. So marketing has a set of OKRs. To hit the numbers that we want to hit this quarter, marketing has to achieve a certain cost per offer, per call, certain ROAS, whatever it is. Sales has OKRs. Sales has to generate X number of deals at an average deal size of Y, for example, right? And then client success has a set of OKRs, et cetera. So we break that down into departmental functional OKRs by department, by quarter. And then within each department, and this is where we start to engage the people that are in those departments, then the question becomes, within the quarter, so now coming up on Q2 of 2023, within the quarter, to make good on these results, what needs to happen? What are the projects? And with projects, we're applying the necessary and sufficient test. So for each project, is it necessary? Do we need to do this thing in order to hit the results? And for the project as a whole, are they sufficient? And those tests help us eliminate anything extraneous. Well, if it's not necessary, if we can't say we need to do project X to hit the OKR, then why are we doing it? And at the same time, if it's not sufficient as a whole, there's something missing. What are we missing?
Yeah, so I think the thing that we've run into that I'm curious if this happens to you is like all that, I get all that. That makes sense. Like we do a lot of those same things in our, and maybe this is just our business model, but we have this, we call it the quarterly scorecard, and it's the top 3 measurements, KPIs that we're tracking per department that kind of align to the bigger picture goals. And we have the opportunity to change the department ones each quarter. But we've been doing this for over a year now. No, yeah, almost 2 years now. And we've rarely changed what those metrics are, because for like our model, it's like the same 3 top KPIs are important on client success as they are in marketing, as they are in sales. And so it's like I think we hit the point where it's like we feel like we're doing more of the same every single quarter, which has led me to feel like, well, maybe we're just doing this wrong. Or maybe that's just normal and that's just the way it is. Does that make sense?
You haven't changed the measurement or the number?
Like the KPI, like that we're tracking. Like, yeah, the number that, like that number might go up, but like fundamentally the key result is measured by the same metric
Sure.
every quarter.
Yeah, but
It's like, because if you're like, oh, well, if it's defined by us getting a number of units, well, every month we're tracking units sold. Every quarter we're tracking units sold. And it's like every project, you're like, all right, well, like, is this going to impact units sold? And it's like, okay, well, we know that these 3 activities, like spend more on ads, try a new funnel, better follow up, like it's the same thing over and over and over again. Like there's not a ton of like, oh, this thing we've never thought of before that we should be trying. Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's not, we could do that, or we could do more of what we've been doing and just do it better.
But that's actually the beauty of OKRs is you're making those decisions in setting OKRs. So you could decide, and it's not a bad decision. And I think this has implicitly been our decision this year, is just double down on what's working and not get fancy. Like if you look at our plan, we're beta testing a new offer in Q2, but compared to like a year ago, we're a whole lot less, experimental this year. We're trying to do some really strong fundamental things well. And that's kind of an implicit decision if you look at our plan, right? Okay. Versus if I was trying to double revenue this year, for example, right? Then probably there'd be a much more aggressive plan around a second product line. The new offer conversation that we talked about last episode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's in our minds. We're beta testing some stuff, right? But if I wanted to double revenue or something very aggressive like that, that would mean a whole new offer that gets scaled this year, which means I'd have another OKR at the top level annually that says, new revenue stream of at least, $2 million per year, whatever the number is. And that would direct a whole bunch of activity, right? So it's almost like, I feel like you always got to have your, keep the lights on OKRs, like what pays the bills, what's the core revenue stream, like get that machine going, keep it going, right? And then, when you feel like going beyond that, which there will be seasons, absolutely, right? For us, it's not today for a variety of reasons, but there will be seasons where you want to, swing for the fences, so to speak. You throw another OKR in there, launch new revenue stream, whatever it may be, right? They call them progress initiatives. They're big picture things that make major leaps forward in the business, but are not necessarily tied to the day-to-day operations of the way you currently do things. Innovation, in a word.
So then in your business, quarter to quarter, do you feel like with, I guess, your mission of like double down on what's work, let's not get fancy, does it kind of feel like, hey, like over the course of this year, we're really just focused on these 5 things, and like what could be considered a project might actually be a project that lasts the whole year, and it's just like the tweaking of that thing versus, like, for example, we need to optimize our funnel. Okay, well, that could mean a lot of things. So, like, I could be optimizing my funnel for an entire year in a variety of ways. How are we going to attempt to optimize it this quarter? These are some of the activities that we're going to focus on. Maybe we're going to focus on Q2. We're going to focus all around between the sales call to like through the follow up process. And then Q3 is, okay, well, we got that dialed. Let's go from lead capture to sales call. And what are the, like, was that
Yeah.
sounding like kind of how you're
Yeah,
tackling
kind
it?
of. So you're right. Like we need to optimize our funnel doesn't really do much for anybody. That's the point of the entire system, right? So once you have OKRs,
Mm-hmm.
take marketing as an example, your OKRs need to define what you're willing to pay for a lead, what you're willing to pay for a call, what you're willing to pay for an offer. Those are the 3 that we measure at least,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so once you have those defined, the entire job of the marketing organization is to optimize the funnel to deliver on those numbers, right? Then the
Mm-hmm.
question becomes how. And so what we do, this becomes more granular now. So we have OKRs at a quarterly level. At a monthly, even weekly level, what we're then doing as a management team is we're looking at where's the bottleneck, right? So what's the bottleneck that's preventing us from, if we're hitting our OKRs, no problem, right? If we're not hitting our OKRs, which ones are, in the red? And what's the bottleneck affecting those results? And we're having that conversation. And that generates, monthly, weekly initiatives and projects that are directly, surgically addressing those bottlenecks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think because our bottleneck has been kind of in the, call it, lead conversion arena at the moment, like I know, like even on our team, it's like it feels like we say, hey, we're going to work on these few things this quarter, but because marketing moves, I think, maybe faster than some of the other departments, it's like, oh, we got to like do this new email campaign. It's like, well, we hadn't even talked about doing an email campaign coming into the quarter. Now we have this new email campaign project. We have this segmentation effort that wasn't on the radar that we think is needed in order to do this new thing that also wasn't a part of what we thought we were focused on. And so it feels like we keep adding all of this stuff every quarter because, I mean, at least in marketing, it moves dynamically enough where it's like, oh, like we're seeing this bottleneck so clearly in real time. We got to make this move. And maybe that's just we're, again, because we've been kind of project based versus, oh, like does this move the needle that we're talked about for the quarter? Let's do that. And then we might have to do another one in 2 weeks or something. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think there's
Like,
stuff like that comes up just like in the moment where you define projects on the fly and they end up being a priority, and sometimes they shouldn't be, and you have to be a little bit ruthless about making that distinction, right? And then
right.
there's some bigger things that come up. So like, even another example. So we did a series of client interviews for market research purposes in Q1.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we said let's and this was, I can't recall exactly how it came up, because it wasn't necessarily in response to a gap in the funnel, but it was,
Mm-hmm.
there was a belief on the team that there is some better messaging out there that we could be using to generate a more sophisticated, higher qualified buyer. So like the funnel wasn't
Mm-hmm.
broken, but there was a belief that, but there's a better funnel out there for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
so that sparked us to hire a consultant. She's also a coach in our program, so we know her well. She's a market research expert, to come in and help us build a strategy to go out and do some customer interviews with our best fit customers to extract insights and language and whatnot that we can use for advertising and for a new funnel. And so that was a project. That was not a, just like 1 week we decided to do it. That was actually a 90-day initiative. The whole thing from design to implementation took about 90 days. And we defined that upfront in Q1 that this is going to be important this quarter, building this thing out and conducting those interviews and doing that research. So in my experience, sometimes there's, stuff that comes up strategically. Like when we sit back every quarter and we ask ourselves what's going to be important this quarter, those kinds of things come up invariably. And then there will be stuff that comes up on the fly. And in those cases, I think you have to be a little bit more ruthless about, yeah, but do we really need to do it now? Or is it just a kind of a make work project?
Yeah. Fair. Yeah. I think the marketing seems to be the culprit in our case. So it's like, hey, we got these like 3 things that we think we're going to focus on for the marketing sales arena. Oh, wait, now all of a sudden we need to redo the VSL. That wasn't accounted for. So like there's obviously a decent amount of work to do that if you want to do it right. Like, do we even have the bandwidth for that? Like what's getting bumped? Like stuff like that happens, I feel like, to us a handful.
I think that's always going to happen in marketing because marketing is the most dynamic part of the business by design, right? Marketing is where you interact with the market and the market's always changing.
Yep.
And marketing done right is the stabilizing effect for everything else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess like to kind of pull back and kind of look at, think about those listening, for those that maybe have maybe felt like maybe they don't have a quarterly planning process and or it hasn't been working for them. Do you have any kind of tips that you would give them for like, hey, here's V1 of maybe how you could be thinking about doing this better that's worked for us, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a few things. You start your planning for your quarter by planning your year. So we take all of our mastermind clients through, once they graduate 90-day pipeline and they join our mastermind, we take them through a training called the focused year. And it doesn't matter when you join the mastermind, whether it's Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4, you're going to plan the year first. Because if we don't know where you're going, then planning the quarter is kind of a futile exercise. So
yeah, we do something similar.
Define the end point that is a year from now. Where do you want to be? Right. Set those OKRs. Set the destination, and then within the quarter, simply define what kind of progress you're going to be satisfied with. Right, both in tangible and intangible ways. So let's say, for example, your revenue goal is $2 million for the year, but there's a ramp up period, and you're not pacing that way for Q1. Right, then don't set Q1 at 500K. Set Q1 at 300K, and then build in a ramp up with certain assumptions over the course of the year. And the key with quarters is, are you making progress towards the annual? And progress isn't always linear, right? Sometimes you're building, you're creating things. Mm-hmm. We've got a new product we're testing in Q2. It's not about revenue for that product in Q2. It's about validating the offer. Mm-hmm. We're building it. And if it goes well, it'll be about revenue in Q3 and Q4.
Yep. I think we do something similar. I think, reverse engineering from the year. I would just add to that, at least what's been helpful for us is every quarter looking at no more than 3 metrics per department that are going to be indicators for you that you are moving towards that annual goal. And then if you reverse engineer, like you said, the ramp up, if there is a ramp up for your goals, like what does Q1 need to look like in those KPIs? What is then Q2, et cetera. And then track that. We look at that weekly. So we have a spreadsheet and we have like a red, yellow, green model. Like red, there's no chance we're going to hit this, hit that metric. Like yellow is like we're off pace, but our strategy is, in check with, we'll be back in alignment. And green's like, yeah, we're on track or exceeding it. And so we look at that and like we're changing those metrics, like red, yellow, green every single quarter. And so that from that regard, that's been so powerful. And that when I mentioned earlier, that's like, we look at the same thing. I guess I didn't expect those metrics to kind of be so consistent. Every quarter they happen to be the ones that we're looking at. They have been, which kind of led to, I'm like, maybe am I doing this wrong? But it definitely has helped keep us focused on only the important stuff. And from a CEO perspective, the frame from that spreadsheet was, and I learned this from Ryan Dice, was like, if you were on an island and you got one email and you could not respond to your team, but they had to send you, 3 numbers by department every Monday that would inform you of on track, off track, what's the health of the business, that you'd be able to glance at that email and you would instantaneously be able to identify what the bottleneck is and or if things are going well or not. And like that, you need that level of like clarity, like no words transferred, just these numbers. And I feel like I do have that because of this. I think we just get stuck on like, let's just keep adding projects because like we can, and we haven't. That's led to sometimes we're exhausted and sometimes we're like, well, we have a whole month left in the quarter and like we haven't identified what we should be working on the rest of this month. Like, what? So we have run into that
See,
a
I
little
think the
bit.
clarity that comes from knowing what numbers drive the business and understanding your business model and knowing where to focus, that clarity creates space and energy for other projects when appropriate. Right? When you got a handle on the core foundational numbers that drive everything, and you've got processes in place to drive those numbers, then satisfy your curiosity in other ways, right? Launch a new product, go mountain biking, take up a hobby. Could be in the business, could be outside the
Yeah.
business, right? But there's lots of good arguments to innovate in the business too, right? And when you have clarity on what drives the core business and you feel like that's under control and it's being measured appropriately, it creates space for more innovation.
Yeah. And for those listening that maybe haven't listened to the episode where we talk about, I think it's called like identify the biggest bottleneck, like this spreadsheet for us, we were able to be like, hey, like we have this feeling right now that like it's either a retention problem or it's a lead conversion problem. Okay, well, like let's look at these metrics, and then we get to ask ourselves, well, say we say we doubled retention. Does that actually solve our problem? Solve the problem? We run the numbers, like no, actually it doesn't. Well, then lead conversion is probably the priority because if so, okay, let's focus that, and even just being able to have that conversation and then say, oh, okay, yes, maybe retention, we'd love to improve it. But if everyone that we have now stayed twice as long and we're still feeling this, experiencing the same challenges, it's not the priority, it's the other one. Because if we fix that and then that pain goes away, well, then we've unclogged the bottleneck. It's like, and I think there's a lot of peace of mind that comes from, all right, like, yep, all my efforts, everything I'm thinking about, any new projects for this quarter really should be focused on lead conversion, for example, than say on the fulfillment side. So definitely check out that episode. If you guys are interested in OKRs, it was Measure What Matters was the name of the book by the person that we forget who wrote it. And then I mentioned the book Shaping Up, but based on our conversation, it sounds like OKRs is going to be
Maybe
the one.
maybe don't read that one.
Maybe don't read that one. So good stuff. I like it. Any final words?
Good.
All right, guys. Well, if you haven't left a rating and review for the show and you are enjoying this conversation, let us know. Take a screenshot, tag us in all of the socials, and we'll see you guys in the next one.